Well, it was a short strike for Air Canada lasting less than 12 hours. Flight attendants hit the picket lines early Saturday after talks with the airline broke down. But by that afternoon, the federal government stepped in, ordering both sides into binding arbitration and directing workers back to their posts. The move allowed Air Canada to begin resuming flights today, but the fallout is just beginning.
And that report just came out 6 hours ago. How things could change. There was a 2 p.m. deadline, and we're going to get into what happened. But Canadians thought they were voting for stability, for an economic genius, a prime minister that would stand up to Donald Trump and restore Canada's place on the world stage. Instead, Mark Carney has been prime minister for 156 days, and the Liberals just made their biggest mistake yet. Let's get into the show. Oh, it's so sweet. The Liberal Party just made a massive mistake, and hopefully it's gonna cost them, and cost them dearly. They just crushed one of the largest workers' strikes in Canadian history, forcing Air Canada flight attendants back to work. Millions of Canadians who supported Mark Carney believed he would be the guy to protect workers' rights. But instead, he sided with corporate mandates, and that betrayal might be the ignition switch that will blow this government apart. And everybody needs to know why this is happening, because this is the exact same Liberal Party that caused the worst inflation in Canadian history. The worst for sure in the last 40 years. Canadians aren't striking for luxury items like beautiful purses and luxury steak. No, they're striking because they literally cannot afford to make ends meet. 2 jobs, 3 jobs, just to cover food and rent. And most of these people don't even have children, and they barely could survive. And instead of addressing affordability, the Liberals focus on mandates. Let's mandate workers back to work. Forget the affordability and forget that they're getting unpaid for a lot of their work. This is the breaking point for many of the Liberal supporters out there that thought they were getting a brand new, spanking new government. But in reality, it's the same old government with the same old people. And guess what? Mark Carney, he was advising Justin Trudeau for half a decade. So maybe this mandating back to work was in fact Mark Carney all along. And Mark Carney was branded as a steady hand. He's nowhere to be found right now. He's on vacation. He's always on vacation during a crisis. He was in fact the person that said we are in the biggest crisis since World War II, and he's on vacation. How serious could things actually be if he's on vacation? And you are not going to believe what he published on his social media account. We know it's not him. He's on vacation, but he has a social media expert. What an expert this person is, doing something that Justin Trudeau would do, his move. But it's probably, like I said, Justin Trudeau was being advised by Mark Carney, so there should be zero surprise. Let's see what Mark Carney tweeted. Here's what Mark Carney tweeted, but for context, 10,500 flight attendants with Air Canada said, screw you, Liberals, we're not going to work at 2 p.m. They're saying that they're not going to follow the Liberal mandate and gave them the big old middle you-know-what. And Mark Carney, instead of addressing the current catastrophic situation that's happening in Canada, this is what he wrote. A few weeks ago, I visited the Port of Vancouver. Our ports connect Canadian businesses to trading partners all around the world. Canada has what the world needs, and with Canadian workers, Canadian materials, and Canadian integrity, we will meet that demand. Oh, so Mark Carney's so pathetic. This is his message right now. Here's his video, and his video does not even have any sound. It's just him walking around talking to somebody in a vest. Canada, we are so cooked. You could already imagine how the comment section went. Derek Smith from Unacceptable Fringe says, they should have thrown you in a container ship and shipped you out of Canada. And I wrote, Mark Carney never wears his Canada pin because he doesn't want to associate with us peasants in Canada. He wears his little white pin for us, never the Canadian flag, because he is superior to us peasants. The Elevate podcast says, are we going to flip the script and begin checking 99% of our containers instead of 1%? The reason that people are saying stuff like this, because there's no volume. There's nothing being said in the video. We have to interpret what it means. And while all this is happening, European leaders join Ukraine's Zelensky for a White House meeting with Trump. Where's Mark Carney? Yeah, he's supposed to be there, isn't he? We're number one best friends with the United States, and we're not invited for one of the biggest meetings in Mark Carney's time as prime minister. He's probably still on vacation. So maybe they did call him and he's like, sorry, I got to finish my vacation. The Liberals really screwed up this time. They pushed around the postal services, the trains, the ports. They all accepted binding arbitration. But when you mess with the little guy, which is the flight attendants, the ones that are making under $50,000 a year and unpaid for a lot of their work, well, you mess with the wrong group.
This is the CIRB order. Here's what I'm supposed to do. I'm expected to say, stand down. I'm expected to direct you to go back to work. I'm expected to end this strike. When this strike would end. I said it clearly then, and I will say it clearly now. This strike will end when we get a collective agreement that works for our members.
Wow, it doesn't look like they're going back to work anytime soon. They don't care about Mark Carney's mandate to go back to work. And that's why I said this is like a pressure cooker, because you think it's only one union that's going to stand up. This is just the beginning. This is going to be a big problem for the Liberals. The Liberals just opened up a pressure cooker and it's starting to release. The reason I say this is all these Liberal voters got tricked. They got tricked into thinking Mark Carney was going to get the best deal for Canada with Donald Trump. We got absolutely nothing. More tariffs, in fact. And now we're getting labor disputes that try to get them back to work. Let's watch this. Avi Lewis describing what's happening at YVR.
Here at YVR at the Vancouver airport with these striking QP workers, the flight attendants who are defying a back-to-work order. The QP BC president, Karen Redoletta, just announced that Air Canada is having to shut down operations. I think the Carney government has severely misjudged this moment. The unfairness of working unpaid is resonating with all Canadians who are upset, who are scandalized by the unfairness of this economy, where people are working two jobs and having an impossible time just paying for food and shelter. This is the rage, the outrage, the legitimate outrage that we're seeing in this strike, and it is shared across the country. This is the 99%. This is the feeling of people's power. When we fight back, we win.
Isn't it funny that he's talking about how bad our economy is? We've had the Liberal government for the last decade, and now people voted for them again thinking they were going to improve things. We are far worse with Mark Carney than we were with Justin Trudeau. Can you believe it? This is incredible. For all the people out there, this thing's not going to go away anytime soon. They're going to be on strike regardless of return back to work. And guess who is going to get reelected tomorrow? Pierre Poilievre, and I'm going to cover the reelection. I believe it's going to be around 70%. We'll see what the final tally is. But when he gets back into the House of Commons and this is still going on, oh boy, get your popcorn ready because dynamite is occurring.
Unpaid work has got to go, hey, hey, ho, ho. Unpaid work has got to go, hey, hey, ho, ho. Unpaid work has got to go, hey, hey, ho, ho.
Now let's take a look at why this is different than the ports, the trains, and the postal workers.
I was disappointed but not surprised. What's interesting here is that unlike, for example, Canada Post, where or the rail or the ports, where there was maybe a bit more the contested public opinion. The public is decidedly on the side of the workers here in terms of their issues, even knowing that it's going to cause them flight disruptions. And so the only message we can get here is that it's Ottawa taking the side of the employer in this dispute, because it's not to necessarily respond to public demand for this. It's also important to recognize that CUPE, the Air Canada component of CUPE, has not announced plans to return to work today. They actually sent out a message to their members and to the public saying that the strike is still on. So a big question to watch today is, will they or won't they? Will they actually show up at work? We are going to see some emergency rallies announced at airports across the country.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about what they're saying, that they don't intend to go back to work. But I'm just curious, you had mentioned this is sending a clear message that Ottawa is siding with the employer. So what do you think that says to other unions negotiating right now?
Yeah, it's really raising the question of, do charter rights exist or not at this point, right? Basically, we're in a situation now, this is the fourth time where in the past 2 years where workers have gone on strike and government has responded quicker, more or less quickly with this novel use of Section 107 to override workers' charter protected right to strike and order them back to work. And so, the problem here is that we may be reaching a tipping point, right? Where if workers are getting the sense that the government is treating their charter rights with such disregard, why should they then treat government orders with any differently than that, right? So I think that it's really creating a situation that is untenable for if we believe in charter rights in this country.
So the minister has actually called for binding arbitration. How does this actually work?
Yeah, so the minister herself cannot directly call for binding arbitration. What she's doing here with this invocation of this arcane part of the Canada Labour Code, Section 107, is essentially referring the case to the Canada Industrial Relations Board, who then basically does a investigation and decides whether it's an impasse, and at that point, calls for binding arbitration. What's interesting in this case is that there appears to be a pretty blatant conflict of interest involved, in that the official at the Canada Industrial Relations Board, who is charged with investigating this claim of impasse and deciding the course of action for the dispute, is actually a former Labour counsel for Air Canada itself. So it's a former legal counsel for the company in question who is being asked to make a ruling on the case. She's been asked to recuse herself, but has not done so. So it further poisons the well in terms of showing, in terms of what the government's sort of acting in good faith means, right? It really raises questions about that.
How do you see this unfolding if they do show up to the picket lines today and not go back to work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's going to be the real test, right? As a labor scholar, I'm thinking back to the 1960s when public sector workers were first fighting for the right to collectively bargain and the right to strike, and then Liberal Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson, after whom our Toronto airport is named, said that, by if the law tells workers that they know that they cannot strike, we may inadvertently create the problem we're trying to solve. And I can't help but think that we may be recreating that same problem here in 2025.
What does this do for morale? I mean, you're forcing workers to go back to work in a situation they don't want to be in. I can't imagine they would do it enthusiastically.
Absolutely. What we're doing here is forcing workers to work against their will, right? We need to be clear about that. And they're working against their will because they're in a contract negotiation to address important issues regarding their working conditions through the collective bargaining process. And what they're seeing is the government is basically steamrolling their rights and preventing them from addressing these very real issues about unpaid work, about the cost of living, particularly for junior flight attendants, that are going to, and they need to find a way to address those at the bargaining table. And this ordering back to work does not address those issues and simply tries to put a lid on the conflict. And what we see from history is that this often has the effect of bubbling up later, perhaps in more agitated ways.
Well, what do you think this says about the balance of power in Canadian labor disputes right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in terms of the balance of power, it's the government putting the thumb on the scales for the employers. It's important to recognize here, I often say that, for collective bargaining to work, it needs to take place on something like a level playing field. And that requires some levers on both sides. Employers have many levers to exert power and coercion over their employees. Workers have one, which is the right to withdraw their labor or go on strike. And so by withdrawing that, or by undermining that lever on the worker's side, it's tilting the playing field decidedly in the face of the employer and creating the dynamic we're seeing now, where rather than the strike serving as an incentive to actually reach agreement at the bargaining table, employers are getting the message from the government that they can just drag their feet, run out the clock, create chaos, whether it's at the airports or the ports or wherever, and use that chaos that they created by not reaching agreement at the table to call for their workers to be ordered back to work against their will. And so this is corrosive to the collective bargaining process, even if you might not care that much about the question of charter rights.
Binding arbitration is meant to be a compromise of sorts, but it sounds like you strongly feel as though this will not be a fair compromise.
This thing is surely going to boil over. If you want change in this country, this might be the moment. Can you believe it? The flight attendants for Air Canada could be the moment where Canada actually wakes up and says, we are sick and tired of a liberal-led government. There's going to be new polling data, and I can't wait to provide all of you where the polling is. I guarantee you there's a lot of voters that voted Liberal for the first time and they were NDP. They're going to be going back to NDP. And there's also going to be voters that are going to say, you know what? I'm going to take a chance with the Conservatives. It gets worse for Mark Carney. Remember, he promised as an election campaign, he's going to deliver 4.5 million homes in 7 years. Well, we're off to a terrible start. Residential is down 4.3% and non-residential permits, this is permits across Canada, is down 15% for the month of June. In a previous report, I showed that nearly 70,000 British Columbians have left. Yeah, they're like, David Eby has destroyed the province. They don't want any part of it. Healthcare is crumbling. Housing is unaffordable. It's one problem after another. And now we're taking a look at this. The Globe and Mail has provided this chart. The mystery of BC finances. We used to be the absolute best with 39 billion in debt, the lowest GDP per debt ratio in Canada. Now we've exploded. I mean, absolutely exploded. After 5 years of NDP, we are now at 89.4 billion. and it's scheduled to increase to $208 billion in 5 years from now. We already have 4 credit downgrades in the last 4 years, and Moody's already letting us know that BC is going to get another credit downgrade next year. The debt is spiraling out of control in British Columbia, and David Eby is fixated on wind turbines. We're nearing the end of the report. Zelensky has arrived in Washington, D.C. with the rest of the EU. We have a massive meeting with Donald Trump tomorrow. Get ready for my report because I'm going to cover this meeting. That's it for today's report. What do you think, Canada? Is this going to be the breaking point for Canadians? The Canadian workers have had enough with the Liberal government coming in and mandating back to work. This could be the moment where Canadians actually wake up and realize the reason that Canada is not respected around the world and that our economy is rapidly going down the sewer is in fact because of the Liberal government. I'll see you on the next report.